Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful Reedville neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts, and we're so very grateful that you're part of our Reading with Your Kids family. We do hope you subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you find your podcast. We have a wonderful guest for you today. She is the author of The Art of Holding On and Letting Go. Her name is Kristen Bartley Lenz. Hey, for all the authors that are listening out there, I wanted to share with you this great email that we received here at the Reading with Your Kids podcast from Dr. Linda Mubarak. She is a past guest and the author of Maxine's New Job. Here's the email. Dear Fatima and Jed, good news! Maxine's New Job has been nominated to receive the prestigious Henri Award at the 2018 Christian Literacy Awards for Outstanding Literacy Work in the Children's Book Division. I sincerely believe your certifying Maxine as a great read helped bring increased social media attention to the book. Thank you for the exposure and the great marketing. We are so happy for Dr. Linda Mubarak that her book, Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, Maxine's New Job, received this prestigious recognition. We would love to help your book receive that same kind of recognition. If you are interested in having your book considered for our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on the contact button, send us a note, and we'll send all the information back to you, or you can go right to our Certified Great Read page on our website. It's fun, it's easy, and it is really an effective way to let the world know that your book stands out above all the rest. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. Joining us on the line right now from Detroit in Michigan. We actually have a lot in common. She's a lot younger than me. She looks a lot better than I do. But we both have a background in social work, and we both love writing, and we both love books. Please welcome to the show the author of The Art of Holding On and Letting Go, Kristen Bartley Lenz. Kristen, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very, very well. Kristen and I, we're commiserating with each other. It's both cold in our respective cities today, but as she said, we both have power. We're both inside. We're both able to stay warm, and so we're both greatly blessed. And I feel greatly blessed to be able to speak to you and learn a little bit more about the art of holding on and letting go.
Great. Yes, you're right. It is gray and gloomy here, but I'm glad I had something fun to look forward to.
So The Art of Holding On and Letting Go, it's a young adult title?
Right, young adult coming of age novel.
Awesome. Tell us about the story.
So the story is about 16-year-old Kara, who is a competitive rock climber girl. She's had an unusual upbringing. Both of her parents are professional mountaineers, so she's traveled the world with them while they've gone on their various expeditions. But her world is turned upside down after a tragedy. It's not as bad as you think it is, but her world is turned upside down, and she is forced to leave her mountain home and go live with her grandparents in Metro Detroit. So it's a year of making new friends and figuring out who she is and uncovering unknown strengths and sort of recognizing that home can be somewhere very different than where you started.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that you talked about, there's this tragedy, this really monumentous event that happened in her life, and you said, well, it's not as bad as you think, but I think that's important for us to know and realize, and also important for our kids to understand that, what we see as minor, and how we react to a situation isn't always the same as other people react, and everybody's kind of entitled to their own reactions.
Sure. And, I've had the reaction from some kids reading the book where they've been a little bit afraid, and maybe they haven't wanted to keep going in the story because they're afraid of what's coming and it's going to be so bad. And we didn't really, and I'll give away the spoiler because we didn't mean it to be a spoiler at all, but there is a point where my character Kara doesn't know if her parents are alive. They're on an expedition and they're at risk, and so that's a huge frightening moment for her. And they do make it out, but she does lose someone else in her life who's very, very important to her and very close to. So it's not this, huge, major, acute grief that she could be going through, but it's still a significant loss in her life. And, I think as all of us go through these various losses in our life, and sometimes they are huge. My own daughter, her best friend lost her mother. That was my close friend. So, kids are dealing with major grief, but also there's losses on a smaller scale too. If parents get divorced, or if you have to move to a new city, even the normal transitions that kids go through, moving from schools from one grade to the next, or, changing friendships, even changing bodies as kids are growing. They're sort of losses and major transitions that we have to learn how to cope with.
Yeah. And I think that a story like this is a great way for us to kind of, as parents, co-reading a book like The Art of Holding On and Letting Go. It's a great way to start talking about those, coping with those losses, and also just helping our kids understand that their classmates, their friends, their teammates, they're all dealing and coping with losses and different things going on in their lives, and hopefully our kids will develop some empathy for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the neat things that your book brings out is just that whole idea of here Kara is growing up in a family of mountaineers, and there's not a lot of kids who grew up in that kind of family. Not a lot of kids grew up in a family where their dad is a professional clown and a magician traveling around the country. And so it's really kind of neat. I know, doing what I do, I know a lot of different people. I have a friend who's a professional polo player, and that's a whole crazy, weird world. But it's fun to kind of, for kids to kind of see that no matter, if we're talking about a family where the parents are city workers or teachers or doctors or mountaineers or clowns, they all share a lot of the same kind of issues and life events.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And, sometimes we make assumptions about people too, like, oh, you must have had, this certain lifestyle growing up, and you don't really know until you get to know that person better and start talking. And yeah, often you will. Those differences help us grow and learn more about our world, but at the same time, those similarities are there too, right? And parents are struggling to show their love and make the right decisions, and while also letting their kids go with those little steps that they need for independence. We all share that.
Yeah. I remember when my kids were younger, I used to talk a lot about them in my shows and as I'm doing magic tricks. And a lot of times kids would come up to me afterwards and say, "Whoa, your kids are so lucky to have you as a dad." And I'm like, well, I'm not like this all the time, right?
You're not performing nonstop.
And if you think about it, if I was like this all the time, that would get pretty annoying after a while.
Right. Exactly.
What kind of insights did being a social worker bring to the creation of The Art of Holding On and Letting Go?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. And, it was funny, when you publish a book, it seems like everyone around you is trying to recognize themselves in your story or they're trying to figure out, oh, so is that really your mom? Is that really your brother, etc. That kind of, which one of my friends is, and it's not like that at all. I'm sure some authors really are doing that, but for the most part, no, there's different aspects of the people around you, in our stories, you can't help but do that. My own values are definitely reflected in the story. But it's not my parents, it's not my grandparents, it's not my daughter, those kinds of things. But someone, who knows me, read the book and she said that she thought that the grandpa in the story was the social worker in me, which was so fascinating. And I would have never ever thought about it, but she had it all figured out, all of her reasons how, the grandpa in the story is, he's very open-minded and empathetic, and he's really sort of a guide in a certain sense to Kara as she's navigating, her loss and these new experiences. And he's there, he's not throwing out advice at her, but he's listening, and he's asking questions, and he's sort of opening doors just slowly for her, and giving her own time. And to her, it felt very much like a social worker. And I thought, wow, I never would have even thought of that. It was not something I did consciously at all, but I think sort of subconsciously, maybe, yeah, my social work values were in there, in a character, which I didn't expect at all. But I think overall more, I've always had this, sort of question about resilience and, how do we grow resilience? Why do some people seem to be more resilient than others? And it's sort of been a question throughout my social work career. And I think I put that question to work in the story, so sort of learning how my character, Kara, how is she resilient, through these tough times? And how do other people around her family and the community, how do they help her become more resilient as well?
Yeah. That question about resilience is one that we've talked a lot about here on the podcast in different ways. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about is that there are a lot of parents out there who, well, they seem determined to bubble wrap their kids and to protect them from any kind of hurt or any kind of bumps or bruises or losses. And from your experience as an author, as a social worker, as a parent and a human being, what do you think about that? How can we best help our kids learn that kind of resiliency and understand that, we're going to get knocked down, but the trick is getting up?
Yeah. And, as a social worker, I tended to work more with families who were so completely overwhelmed or struggling themselves, whether it was because of their own mental health issues or, economic issues and poverty, where their kids weren't being bubble wrapped, right? Their kids were really left to figure it out on their own often. So it's been more in my personal life, and for me having a teenage daughter and me having to make some of these decisions myself, that I've noticed that, and it's so hard to watch our kids struggle, and the temptation to just jump right in and fix everything it's so strong, right? And I really had to start thinking about this a lot more, because my daughter she's a junior in high school now. So, she's going to be off in college, and she's talking about wanting to be out of state. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's so much you need to learn before you can, live on your own like this. And so all of a sudden there's almost this panic of, I need to teach you all this stuff and you need to learn all this. But really, someone once, I was listening, I don't know if it was another social worker or an author, and she was talking about, how we can give our kids safe spaces at home. So, they're out there at school and with friends, and, some of them are starting to work and they're playing sports, and they are facing these, hurts and rejections and failures, and they're coping with it as best they know, and they come home, and if we can give them at least a safe space where they can talk when they're ready without us bombarding them. But but for us to be there whenever we can and be ready, without pouring in advice, and listening. Listening is the key, and they'll ask when they need it, but so often it seems to be that we can just ask questions, to better understand. It's sort of that, help me understand what's happening. And they can sort of talk themselves through it. And sometimes it's even, take a pause, right? When you have that temptation to just jump in and fix it, I'm going to call your coach, or I'm going to call your teacher, let me send out an email. If you just stop and listen and empathize with your child, let them talk, give them some space, hours later or the next day or a couple days, often it just gets fixed. Like they just figure out how to do it on their own. And that's how that resilience grows, little step by step.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's one of the reasons we created the podcast, is to get parents into the habit of spending that quiet time with kids in conversation. And by quiet time, I mean being there. And when you're reading a book together, when you're talking about a book with our kids, I think that's kind of one of those quiet times where you're not talking directly to your kid about an issue that he or her is facing. You're talking about this character in a book. And that way you're not lecturing them about what they should do in their particular life. They're just talking, sharing ideas about what Kara should be doing in her life, what Kara could be doing, and how is Kara dealing with this. And so that's and if we start that conversation when our kids are smaller, when we're reading the alphabet board books with them, and we continue reading with our kids through their middle grade years and into high school, even though it's kind of weird sometimes to read aloud with our high school kids, I think it's really beneficial for the family. It's just a wonderful way to have that kind of conversation and to be able to spend time quietly with each other.
Yeah, and these are some of my favorite moments with my own daughter too. We started reading together, from the time she was a little girl, and this was special time. Sometimes this grew into, her asking me to tell stories, and sometimes I would purposely try to shape a story to fit what she was going through. And other times, it was just, we were talking about the characters, and you branch out from those stories. And even there were books that I was maybe hesitant about letting her read. That's a whole big question that comes up, how much, should you, we don't want to censor, but yet you don't want your kids exposed to, too much too soon. And I remember she wanted to read The Book Thief when she was only 9 or 10. Maybe she was 10 in 5th grade. And I wouldn't have, and I know that the book to me was just devastating, right? It's so powerful and sad and deals with such a difficult part of our humanity. But I let her pick it up and start it, and we were reading together side by side, but reading separately. She wanted to read it on her own, but at some point she stopped, right? And she trusted me, and she said, can we read this together? I'm afraid. She knew where it was going. She knew something was very sad, was hurtful was going to happen, and she wanted to read it together. So that part, so even when you're reading separately, there's a way to come together and share those stories and then talk about them as they get older. And even now, so we don't read as much together out loud. My daughter will more commonly share certain passages. We'll do that back and forth, oh, listen to this, this is beautiful, or this really struck me as being very, very powerful. Or it'll lead to, like you were talking about, more conversations. It could lead directly back to something in their life, or just something that's happening in our world, as their own worldviews are growing and expanding, and they're trying to understand.
Yeah. I want to get back a little bit to talk about the grandfather character, the social work character in your book. And I think that's a neat kind of role. I think it's important for our kids to have a lot of different people in their lives, and a lot of different people in their lives. Right. And I think it's really incredibly valuable to have that kind of grandfather role, someone who's there, someone who obviously loves you and cares about you, but is willing to kind of be quiet and let the young person kind of set the tone, and is more comfortable kind of sitting back and just kind of being a sounding board sometimes, or being the person who is willing to take that chance. So maybe, maybe if you hadn't been comfortable reading The Book Thief or letting your daughter read The Book Thief, maybe it's something that she would have done with her grandfather on the QT. But, but I think that those, I guess I'm mentioning it because I think we all have different relationships in our lives. And as we age, I mean, I know now in my life, I have different relationships with different young people. And, sometimes being that kind of grandfather, that person who's just willing to be quiet and to listen can be so valuable to not only to a young person, but to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you think of mentors, and who can be a mentor in a young person's life, apart from their parents, it could be an uncle, it could be a neighbor, it could be a coach, and I think about, even if I think about the influences, in my daughter's life, she's had so many different soccer coaches over the years. And, she had one in particular, a young woman who, she was just there, the way she talked to the kids at that time when they were in middle school and those transitions they were going through. It was wonderful for, my daughter and the others to be able to have that perspective, to know there was, maybe if they weren't that comfortable talking to their parents about something, they could bounce it off of her, that coach. She had been there. Maybe she was even a little closer, remembering stuff than, at that age, than we, our parents were. So yeah, and kids get, they often, our relationships with our parents are so complicated, and kids don't want to let their parents down, right? They want their parents to be proud of them. And it's hard admitting mistakes or when you're unsure. Sometimes that extreme closeness makes it even harder to talk sometimes. So you do need just that little bit of distance. And just the more exposure you have to people who have different personalities and different ways of handling situations and, different careers. It's just all part of growing you into the more, open-minded, worldly person you're going to become.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, if a family sits down and reads The Art of Holding On and Letting Go together, are they going to want to put on a pair of mountaineering shoes and go up and tackle the closest mountain?
Yeah, that's great. I have had a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm so inspired to try rock climbing now. You totally convinced me. This isn't so scary. I can do it." And part of my challenge in writing the book was to be able to convey rock climbing in a way that experienced climbers would appreciate it, and wouldn't find it, repetitive and too simple as I was explaining it, but also really explaining it in a way that someone who had never been rock climbing wouldn't be completely confused, So it was a challenge, and it was fun, and I think it worked from the feedback I've been getting from people. So people who have been climbing, were able to sort of re-experience it in the book. And people who haven't been climbing were saying, "Yeah, I want to give this a try." And climbing is actually a really fun family experience also. So when I started climbing, I learned outside, and there weren't that many indoor gyms. But now the indoor gyms are just everywhere. So it's a good way a safe way to be able to learn and try it out. I still, rock climbing outside is still my favorite. And it can just be a wonderful nature experience at the same time, to be outdoors and hiking and have fresh air, and sort of connecting with this other living world that's all around us. But indoor climbing is great exercise, and it's something that, families can do together. If you have a child learns to belay, which is the term for managing the rope so that the climber stays safe and doesn't actually fall and hit the ground. When a child learns to belay and can belay a parent who's climbing, that's a huge responsibility. So it's really fun actually to have those roles reversed, where the parent has to trust the child not to drop them. And the child has this great responsibility. So it's very fun. Yeah.
Talk about an empowering experience for the kid to say to the kid, "Hey, I am putting my life in your hands. Here you go."
Yeah. right?
Yeah.
So a lot of growth.
Yeah. So this was your debut novel. Am I right about that?
Right. First novel.
How did it feel hitting, getting such great response and winning awards with your first novel?
Yeah, you hope that your book is going to be well received, but it's a really competitive marketplace right now. I don't even like talking about books as being part of a marketplace. But in a way it is. And there's a whole business side of being an author that I kind of knew was coming, but I didn't really know. And I sort of didn't want to think about it, and then all of a sudden you have to think about it, right? If you need to sell books in order to be able to publish more books. So I think, I knew that I was putting out the best book I could, that I was working with a wonderful publishing team. My editor is also a college professor and the director of the Yale writing program. And so he was really, really experienced. We went through, round after round after round of months and months of intensive editing. So I knew that, there's a point where you just have to be done, right? This is the best I can make it, and I'm putting out quality literature, and I'm proud of it. And you hope that your publishing house and everything that you do helps the book to actually reach people, because there are so many books that go out that people just don't find, right? So it's sort of a combination of, hard work, but also some luck in there too. And, as word of mouth spreads and the right people who can write reviews and make recommendations to libraries and all teachers and all of that sort of get wind of your book and give it a chance. So I'm really grateful that so many people have been able to read it and relate to it and have continued to spread the word.
That's awesome. And you bring up a really, really important point. We have lots of authors and aspiring authors listening to the show. I always like to bring it back. I tend to make everything about myself. I don't like to, but writing a book, people don't like to admit this. Writing a book is part of show business. You're creating something that's entertaining that you want to put eyes on. And one of my mentors, when I was getting out of social work and getting into showbiz, sat me down one day and he said, "Look, show business is two words, show and business business is the much bigger of the two words. And if you don't take care of business, there's never going to be a show." And that's the same with books. It's the same with magic. It's the same with performing arts. It's you do want to, as a writer, we think of ourselves as artists, but you got to take care of the business, or else that book is just going to sit on the shelf.
Yeah, that's true. And, it's learning a whole new set of skills too. So, but it's good. It pushes me out of my comfort zone, but not too much, right? I've been able to do it step by step and, with more, this radio time and podcast and public speaking and standing up in front of groups. It all happens gradually, and we learn as we go. And, it's been a great experience.
Awesome. Do we have another book in the works right now?
Oh, I'm trying. Yes, I had a great opportunity over the past year. So there's a professional writing organization called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. There's no short way to say that. The abbreviation is SCBWI. And you've probably talked about it on your podcast before. But if anyone is interested in writing for children, it's a great website to check out. They have all kinds of resources, and I was awarded a mentorship last year through my Michigan chapter of SCBWI, and so this was a mentorship with another author, award-winning, wonderful author Leslie Connor. She mostly writes middle grade novels. She was just recently a National Book Award finalist, so that's another name. Look up Leslie Connor's books. They're just amazing. Almost all of her books have a social worker in them. I love it. Right? So, but I've been working with her on revising my newest novel. We've gone back and forth with a few drafts, and I'm actually waiting for her response right now. I think I'm close to sending it out. The publishing company that published my first novel, The Art of Holding On and Letting Go, was a very, very small press. So their goal is to find new authors and help them produce the best book possible and launch them. And then it's up to me to take it from there. So I need to find another publishing house, another editor. I don't have an agent at the moment, so I'll be querying agents with my new novel. And so fingers crossed, send some good energy out there for me that I'll find the right fit for this new book.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, where can people find you online so they can know more about you, more about the art of holding on and letting go, and be the first to find out when that new book is available?
Yeah, I've been trying to keep my website updated with news and events and all of that, so that's probably the best place, and that is www.KristenBartleyLenz.com. And, I'm on social media with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, but I'm really not as good at posting as I should be, and I try. So I'm there, and when people find me, I absolutely respond, but I'm a little scattered and and random doing my own posting.
Well, you have a lot going on, a daughter in high school, a new book out, a website. So yeah, you have earned the right to be a little bit scattered. So, we're really happy. We're really happy that you were able to spend time with us today. We've been talking to the author of The Art of Holding On and Letting Go, a great book for, young adults, for a great book for a family to co-read together. Kristen Bartley Lenz has been our guest. Kristen, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Marian Saunders. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's also the author of My Whirling, Twirling Motor. Be sure to join us for a fascinating conversation about that book and about ADHD and how we can help support every kid and help them reach their full potential. Hey, we want to thank Kristen Bartley Lenz for joining us today. And of course, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Thank you so much for taking the time to write a review of the podcast wherever you find your podcast at. It really helps other folks find the show. And we also want to thank you so much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking through the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.